This show is listener supported. You can join us and help our show grow to support more adoptees by going to adopteeson.com/partner. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is episode 129, Cathy. I'm your host, Haley Radke. Welcome. Happy New Year. It's so good to be back with you this week, and I hope you had some time to rest over the holiday season to come back refreshed and renewed. Before we get to the show, I want to let you know I have a special announcement, so make sure you stick around to the end of the episode to hear our news. Okay, let's get to it. Cathy Caputo is our guest today, and she has quite a shocking story, so I'm not going to spoil anything here. We talk about closed adoption, grief and loss, and what it's meant for Cathy to start an in-person adoptee community. We wrap up with a recommended resource. And as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Cathy Caputo. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Haley. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. I have met you in person, but we didn't have that much time together. So now I get to hear your story. Why don't you start with that for us, please?
Okay. So I was born on an Army base in Texas in the 70s, and my adoptive parents picked me up at an attorney's office in downtown San Antonio when I was 4 days old. And we flew home to the East Coast that same day. And then a few months later, my adoption was finalized and it was a closed adoption. And for 40 years, my birth story began with, well, we'd been married for 6 years and we just couldn't have a baby. And I couldn't get pregnant. And it was filled with kind of disjointed stories like, you had the hiccups when we picked you up and we were worried about getting on the airplane to fly home with you when you had the hiccups. And our neighbors came across the street when we got home late at night and they brought all this Korean food. And I just look back on that time now and I feel so sad for my little self who must have been really scared at flying on an airplane and being in a weird smelling office building and having all these strangers pass me around. So that was my birth story for 40 years. And I really didn't know anybody who had such a birth story. My adoptive parents, they adopted my sister 3 years after I was born. Her adoption was a little bit different. And then they had my brother, biological to them, 4 years after that. So there's two adopted sisters and then a biological brother. And growing up, I always knew I was adopted. It wasn't really a big thing, except for some family friends who would say on occasion, you're so lucky that you were adopted. You're so lucky that your parents adopted you. And sometimes my mom would cry and she would look at me and say, I just don't know why she gave you away. I just don't know why she gave you up. And I never really knew what to do with that as a child. That was rough. But anyway, I had a really great childhood. I was very, very blessed in that way. And I didn't actually spend too much time thinking about my adoption. I just assumed because I was born on an Army base that my biological mother was either dependent, so her father was probably in the Army and she was too young to keep me, or she herself was in the military. And in order to keep her job at that time, she wouldn't have been able to keep me as a single mother. So that's just kind of the story, the explanation for my adoption that I made up as I grew up, because I didn't have any details to go on. I wasn't given anything.
Except for the hiccup story.
Right. And yeah.
That doesn't give you much to background.
No, except for that I was probably freaking out, right? I had the hiccups inconsolably for hours on end, apparently.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, my boyfriend at the time and I, we drove from Arizona back to the East Coast, and we planned a stop in Texas at the hospital I was born in. We thought that we were going to walk in and get some information about my adoption from the hospital staff. So I don't really know what we're thinking, but it didn't end up happening. He forgot that we were going to do that. I, of course, did not forget that that was the plan, but I just didn't mention it when he forgot and we drove out of town because I just wasn't ready to go there yet. Wasn't ready to open that box yet. So fast forward a few years out of college and working, and on a few occasions, my adoptive parents would mention to me, we have some information about your adoption if you're ever interested. And those conversations were so awkward and stilted, and I could tell they were kind of putting it out there and then like running backwards. And looking back, I think it's because we just never talked about adoption. We didn't have any framework or any foundation to even have a discussion about it ever. And so I could tell, of course, that they were awkward about even offering. And being the good adoptee, I didn't want to hurt anybody or rock the boat or cause any conflict. And so I always just said, no, that's okay. And that was they probably mentioned it maybe 3 or 4 times over probably about 10 years. And each time I just said, that's okay. Because, you can tell adoptees are good at reading people. I think that I don't know if we have a sixth sense about it, or maybe we just spend so much time observing people's reactions to what we say and what we do because we don't want to be rejected. So we're just really good observers of nonverbal communication, probably.
I think so. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So I think it was probably when I had all my kids and things were kind of a little bit calming down that my mom asked my husband and I to go out to dinner. And she said, don't bring your children, which is a little unusual for just she and my dad and my husband and I to go out to eat. And I thought that they wanted to talk about like their medical directives or their living will or something awful. And so I was prepared for a pretty bad conversation. But we had dinner and everything seemed pretty much normal. And then after we finished eating, my mom pulled out like a manila folder and she laid it open on the table in front of me. And it had some photocopies of yearbook pictures, what looked like yearbook pictures. And there was a man in a military uniform as a single picture. And then below that, it was the same man with his wife and 4 children. And my mom started crying and she said, this is your biological family. And so I was looking at my first father and my first mother and four siblings. So that was pretty out of body. I remember just feeling completely numb and like my real self left and then left at the table was just like a numb robot person. And my husband, I remember, just kept staring at me. And he kept saying, are you okay? Are you okay? And I could barely even respond. I was taking in words, but I wasn't putting out words. And so my parents continued and my dad took over from my mom and he started crying and he said, your father passed away 14 years ago. So he's gone. And my dad said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He just kept apologizing. And that was hard to see your dad crying. And I just kept staring at the picture and hearing all these voices come in like they were in tin cans talking to me. And they were all staring at me and I was just staring at the pictures. And I kept thinking in my mind, I have 4 siblings. I have 4 siblings. I have 4 siblings. I have 3 brothers and a sister. I can't believe this. I have 4 siblings. And then one little thought crept in and it was, this man looks so familiar to me. He really looks so familiar. So we left the restaurant and I still was barely talking. And my husband kept asking me if I was okay. And it really took me weeks to get over the shock that my parents were married. I had 4 full siblings that were older than me. and I had been given up. It was pretty rough. And it really was weeks of shock and then incredible sadness. And then weeks after that, just anger and rage. So much anger.
I don't know how to ask this. Is there a different way they could have presented you with this information? Like, I just feel like you were just shocked into this info. Like, however, they had asked you a few times, like, if you wanted it, and you were kind of like, you said being the good adoptee and being like, no, it's okay.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, they did caveat it with saying, we've had some medical issues in the past couple of years, and we're worried that something's going to happen to one or both of us before we give you this information that we have. And then you won't be able to ask us your questions. And so I get it. I mean, I get where they're coming from. I don't know. How do you deliver that to somebody especially when you haven't ever talked about it? Never in 40 years. Like,
oh yeah. So I mean that the state you are in is so completely understandable. And so you're fast forwarding a few weeks and you're just angry and trying to take this information in. What's happening for you?
So at the time, I have 4 kids, and they were ages 5 to 10. So life is pretty busy. And my husband at that time was working 2 weeks from home and then 2 weeks out in Colorado. So I was full-time mom, full-time everything. And I just had like zero mental and emotional space for any of that. And so, like we do, it just got stuffed. And it definitely sat there for sure, like rocks in my soul. But, it can't be there forever. So eventually my husband came home and found a job closer to home. And our kids got a little older and were in school more full time, and, all of them. And it just took some time. It just took a long time to start unpacking it bit by bit when I had time. A lot of times that was in my car after I had dropped all of my children at their various places. And I remember pulling over a few times in neighborhoods, on the side of roads, and just sobbing and screaming and sobbing. The shower is a good place for that too, late at night. Kind of a good place.
The water kind of covers up the sound.
Yep. I thought for sure someone would come running in, but no one ever did, which I guess is good.
Is it? It's a little bit disconcerting. No.
I know.
How long a time period are we talking about here? Like, is this like months, or like how long were you kind of in this state?
Yeah, I would say probably between 6 and 9 months, maybe.
Wow.
It took me a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that was just the sheer magnitude of it and the shock of it and the heaviness of it. And also part of it was, like I said, that's a busy, busy state of life when you have young children. There's just you can't even go to the bathroom by yourself. So, there's just no space really. No. On any plane.
So in the folder, was there more than photos? Like, was there information? Was there names? Like, did you have everything you needed? Like, if you wanted to contact them?
Yeah. So there were names. It was a yearbook. So there were names. I had the names of my parents and then first names of each of my siblings and their ages at the time the photo was taken, which I came to find out was probably around the time I was conceived. So it's possible it's even in that photo, technically, in that family photo in the yearbook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I did have their names. And, it was a closed adoption. So that's interesting. I've never asked my adoptive parents when they knew. I've asked them how, but I never asked when. I don't know if I can handle that. It's kind of like finding your receipt. I don't know if I can handle that either. So, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, the story goes, there's two versions of it, but the one that I've heard the most is that while we were in the attorney's office and they were picking me up in San Antonio, the attorney had a file open on his desk, and my parents and I were in the office with him, and he got up and left his office for a few minutes. And so my adoptive father, of course, jumped up and looked over the desk at the paperwork and saw the names. So I don't know if that was planned by the attorney. I don't know if maybe my biological parents said something to the effect of, you can give them our information. Because, there weren't open adoptions back in the 70s, really. It definitely wasn't like a standard thing. I don't even know if it ever happened. So I don't know why that happened, why he left, because that's a little bit weird. But yeah, so they knew the names at that point, but I don't know when they put together the whole yearbook photo. And so what had happened was my dad was also in the Army, and they were in this really big school together at the same time. And so this yearbook was for all the students in this military school that they were at the same time, my adoptive father and my biological father. They didn't know each other. I think my dad said that there was like 500 students at a time there. But at some point, my adoptive father was looking through his yearbook and saw that picture of my biological father and put the name that he had seen all those years before with the picture. That's the story I was told.
Wow, that is quite the thing. And they lived really far apart and right? Like, oh my goodness. Okay. That is so wild. The other thing you're processing in this whole time is that these kids were all older than you.
Yeah. And, and they were my full siblings. Like, I could not come up with a reason, right? I mean, I think that's what we all want, right? We want to know why. And it's never enough. The answer is never going to be good enough. I could not imagine, could not come up with anything about why. Why would you give away your fifth baby?
And how many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids.
Okay. And you had 4 at the time as well.
I did. Yeah. And definitely my husband and I would talk about that. Like, if we got pregnant with a 5th baby, like, why would we give it away? Like, what's one more at that point? I mean.
Okay. So what do you do?
Eventually I did begin searching on the internet I knew my father had passed away. So I began searching for my mother, my first mother, and for my siblings. And since I had all their names, it wasn't super hard. One of my brother's names is a little bit more unusual, so I started with him. Unfortunately, his name is also the name of a pretty big NFL player. So like every search engine result was probably 5 pages of NFL player. And then maybe some other people with the same name.
You have to like go into Google, type the name in, and then like minus football, minus NFL. Like,
I know.
Do all this extra stuff.
All these Google caveats.
Right.
Yeah. So it was a little bit challenging because my biological parents had been in the military for quite some time, many, many years. And so they had moved around a lot. And so, the record of their addresses was pretty long, and it was hard to sort out where she was currently, where my first mother was currently. So it took me a little bit of time to narrow it down to 2 addresses that I thought were probably where she might be currently living. And so then I had to decide, do I want to write her, just her? Do I want to write all of them? How do I want to do this? And that took me some time to figure out. Yeah. So while I was trying to sort that out and decide what I wanted to do and how I was going to write these letters and what I was going to say, I applied, or I looked into the Texas Central Adoption Registry. And so in Texas, it's a registry where you can put your name on the registry. And if anybody from your biological family is looking for you, they put their name on the registry. And then these people in Texas match you, basically. So I did put my name on the registry list. And then a couple weeks later, I got a letter and it said, basically, nobody's looking for you. So that was a little bit of a clue for me that probably my siblings didn't know about me. Because I just figured, they're older than me. And if they had known I was still alive, like, wouldn't one of them be looking for me somehow, somewhere? I don't know. I just had this pretty strong feeling that they didn't know about me. Then it dawned on me that because I knew both of my biological parents' names, I could apply in Texas for my original birth certificate. And I knew I didn't really need it. I mean, I had everybody's names. I was pretty sure that they were my family of origin. But I applied for it anyway because I really wanted to see if I had a name, if they had named me. And while I was waiting for it, I was trying to tell myself that either way it was going to be okay. And so when I finally got the original birth certificate, I had no name. I had no first name and no middle name. And that was really hard. That was really hard to know that I was nameless for a few days and that they just didn't care to name me. That was hard. And I remember instead of feeling kind of triumphant, like I got my OBC, I just felt small and diminished because I didn't have a name. Anyway, after that, I was pretty angry. And I was still trying to decide, do I want to write my first mother? Do I want to write my first mother and siblings? How do I want to handle this? And after the birth certificate thing, I just started to get more and more ambivalent about writing my mother.
Did you ever just think, I'm not going to contact them? Or was that even in your mind? You're like, I'm going to contact them. I don't know which person yet, but, or were you like, no, I don't know.
I really wanted to know my siblings.
Okay.
I really, really, really wanted to know my siblings, especially because I had such a strong feeling that they didn't know about me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know. And I just, in my adoptive family, I was the oldest child and I had two younger siblings, and I hated being the oldest child. Hated it. I never felt comfortable being the oldest child. I felt like it was a burden. I just didn't like it. And in hindsight, I knew I wasn't the oldest child. I knew that wasn't my birthright. I knew I had older brothers. I always wanted older brothers. I knew I had them. And, babies can hear in the womb starting about 20 weeks. And so I heard them. I heard them laughing and yelling and playing and singing and praying. And I knew that they were out there, and I knew that they were mine. They were my siblings, and I was theirs. Yeah. I knew that we fit together. And so I really wanted to find them. But like I said, at that point, I was pretty up in the air about my birth mother. I think if I could have just contacted my siblings, I probably just would have. But I did, again, this sense of loyalty that is so strong in us. I didn't want to blindside her. I did feel like I did need to contact her, either by herself, first, or with them. So, my goodness, it took me a long time. I think from the time I found out until the time I actually sent my letter to her, I did decide just to mail it to her to give her that kind of heads up. It was probably a year and a half. It took me a year and a half.
And how old were you then? Were you in your 30s or?
No, I was in my young 40s.
Early 40s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So she was in her late 70s, early 80s at this time. And I did a few times in that year and a half, I did Google her name to see if she had passed away. And I never got any results back that she had. And my husband and one of my good friends, they were like, I really think that if you're going to write her, you need to do it, And it just I just couldn't. It just took me a while. I just couldn't. And I found that with other adoptees that I know, you may know it's the right logically thing to do, but you just have to make that decision on your own. You just do. Anyway, so I did write to her. I sent it certified mail, and it took 10 days, 10 very long days. I felt like I had sent a bomb through the mail. It took 10 days for me to get the little card back. And my biological sister had signed for the letter, not my mother. So that wasn't good. So I didn't really know what to make about that. I knew that they lived in close proximity. One of the addresses was close to my biological sister's home. So I thought, well, maybe she just gets her mail sometimes, or maybe this went back to the post office, so she went to get it at the post office. I didn't know. But anyway, it took a couple weeks. And one night I thought, you know what? I hadn't heard anything after maybe 3 weeks. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to Google her name again. And I did. It was late at night. All my kids were in bed. And 2 new results had come up, and she had passed away. She was gone. Yep.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Both of them.
Yep. And so that was so hard. That was a rough night. And it actually surprised me, my response, that my response was so strong to that news was, I mean, understandable, but I don't know, a little part of me inside was kind of surprised that it hurt so much. So that took a little bit of time to get through. And then I just thought, oh my gosh, what are my siblings thinking now? Because, the letter I wrote to my first mother was written under the assumption that she knew she gave birth to me. So I didn't do a whole lot of explaining, about me, because of course she would have known that she had this baby at this time in this location. So I thought, oh gosh, my bio sister signed for this letter. So certainly she's read it. She's probably shared it with my brothers. What am I going to do? So a couple of weeks turned into a couple of months. I hadn't heard anything, just nothing, no response from anybody. And I decided, okay, well, I guess I need to write them now. I need to explain who I am, what's going on. So I was back at square one, writing another letter to my siblings this time. And this time I included that copy of my OBC, which I was so grateful that I had decided to get, and a few pictures of me, just a few different points in my life. And I handwrote them each the same letter, but I wrote them each a letter and sent out 4 letters at the same time. And then we went to Disney World. It was such a good distraction. I highly recommend it.
Oh my gosh.
Write your letter and go on vacation.
So they can't even get in touch with you if they wanted to.
Right.
It's your choice when you open up the next letter.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But it didn't matter. There was nothing waiting for me when I got back from Disney, but it was a good time and a good way to make it through those first couple of weeks. They did eventually write me a letter. It was pretty businesslike. Looking back at it, I can laugh now, but it wasn't funny at the time. Yeah. So they wrote me a letter, and they were asking basically for more information. They wanted more information than I had given them. I didn't know why, but anyway, and then we agreed to meet the following month. So we set up a place that wasn't too far from my home, because actually one of my brothers lives 9 miles from me currently.
Come on.
No, I'm not kidding. I know. And my other 2 brothers, one lives about an hour and a half west of me, and another about an hour and a half east. So they're not too super far. And my bio sister lives up north. She's not super close. Anyway, so we met on the Epiphany in January. So I thought that was kind of neat. And we met at a little restaurant nearby. And I really wanted to go by myself, and my husband was really worried about that. But I just felt pretty strongly that I came into their family on my own. And so I wanted to come into their family 40 some years later on my own. And so I did. And it was pretty nerve wracking, but I'm glad I did it that way. And they were so super welcoming. They were so wonderful. And I remember one of my brothers had one of his hands up on the table, and we had been talking for a while, and I just caught a glimpse of his hand, and I was just staring at it because it looked so much like my hand. And of course, I had never seen a hand that looked like my hand before. And so I said something about it, just a little comment, and all of my brothers put all of their hands up on the table, like immediately. And I put my hand up on the table, and we just looked at each other. So they're so welcoming. And so we were there for 4 hours. We were sitting there talking for 4 hours. And later that night, one of my brothers, we all texted to say how great it was to meet and everything. And one of my brothers said, we lost mom last year, but this year we gained a sister, and we're so lucky. So they're so sweet. Yeah. There's a lot of coincidences. So this one brother and I live 9 miles apart now, but at one point the Army stationed our families in the same town. And so we lived probably, as the crow flies, about 2 miles apart for about 10 months. And my adoptive family and my first family, we went to the same church for a couple months. And my brothers served on the altar at those services. And so I probably at 6 years old was watching my brothers serve on the altar. So crazy. And one of my brothers and I both worked on the same government project at one point, like in the early 2000s. So we were at the same base. I was in his offices at one point. And then on another Army base, we were probably working within like a fourth of a mile from each other for months and months. So it's just really amazing that we travel in so many of the same circles for so many years.
I'm sorry. I'm just quiet. I'm just like crying over here. And Cathy's just keeping it going. I'm like falling. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get this like the happy 4-hour meeting, but what's next? Like, what does reunion really look like?
I was so binging your podcast at that point. It was such good timing.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Is this recent? How long ago was this?
About almost 2 years ago.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It's such great timing. All the healing series you were doing and reunion stories from other adoptees are so helpful. Talking about like the reunion roller coaster and the reunion hangover is so real.
Okay, I feel like this is the first interview I've had with someone where they have listened to my show while they're going through stuff.
Wow.
Okay, sorry, it's like a meta moment for me. That's so awesome. Okay, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful, Haley. I was so appreciative then, and I still am, of course. Those stories were just like lifelines to me, to know that this is okay, right? This is okay. It's going to be okay. All those ups and downs, so hard. And, my husband was just like so tired of talking about it with me. Super burned out. And I think I was even pushing the edge with a couple of my close friends. And so I wasn't so worried about my husband's burnout, but I was a little worried about their burnout. I know. So it was so great to have these podcasts to listen to and to dig into and really have resonate with me. And, I felt like early on in reunion, I felt like I wanted to shrink down to about 10% of my size and go live in my brother's shirt pocket so that I could just like be with him all the time and just hang out with him all the time. And that was normal, right? Like I didn't feel like a freak show. I knew that was normal because I'd listened to other adoptee stories, and the reunion hangover is so hard. I think I heard about it even before it happened, and I was like, that's kind of weird, but for sure, it's a thing. It's so hard to leave. It's so hard to leave. I would be at my brother who lives so close by. I'd be at his house until like 1 a.m. And we just, I mean, maybe it was mutual. I hope it was, but just couldn't leave, like just couldn't leave. Really hard. Anyway, so reunion has been good with my brothers. We see each other. The brother that lives close, we see each other probably once a month. The other two brothers I get to see maybe every couple of months. We try and get together, usually with spouses, sometimes with kids.
So did it turn out that they literally didn't know about you? Or did they, I don't know, concoct a story or something? I'm just picturing, because that's pretty old to see your mom pregnant, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they told me right away in that first meeting where we met at the restaurant for all that time, they told me right away that they remember our mother being pregnant, and they remember that she went away for some time before I was born. So she wasn't there for probably a good 3-4 weeks before I was born. And they remember our father coming home and telling them that they had lost the baby. And so that was it. And they don't really remember if they were explicitly told or if it was just implied, but it was, don't talk about this. And that was it. No one ever talked about it again, about me. No one ever talked about me again. And so when they got my letter, they did reach out to one aunt on each side, my maternal aunt and a paternal aunt, and neither of them knew about me either. So none of my extended family even knew that my mother was pregnant with me.
So like the secret goes to the grave. I mean, you really don't know what happened, and there's no way to find out. I guess I'm thinking of all those terrible, this is feels like way back in the day this happens. I know it happens currently, but maybe not in North America. But like the doctor comes back and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, your baby died." But really they whisk you off to like some private adoption. But there's no way to find that out. Oh my gosh. I'm just like in shock here. Sorry, I'm just like, wow.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What are your thoughts on what happened?
I don't know. My brothers and I have gone over and over and over this so many times, and just what ifing it to death. And I don't know. We don't know. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They were just completely shocked to get my letter. Shocked. Because our parents were married for over 30 years before our father passed away, and they were church-going family, and there's just no answers. We can't even guess of a reason. So that was hard for a long time for me, and them too. Maybe it's still hard for them. I don't know.
Did any of them ever ask for DNA testing? Did you ever do that?
Yeah, I had already done Ancestry even before I even got all this information. I'd already done it, and I never had any closer hits than like a second or third cousin. So eventually one of my brothers did do Ancestry also. And yeah, we're full siblings. I don't think that there was really any question after the birth certificate with, their parents' names on it and the address was right and all of that's right.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. And so that sort of negates the, I don't think a doctor whisked you away in the back.
Right. And the timing was right. They do remember their mother being pregnant at that time. Right. And
yeah. I guess there's always the is there infidelity? That's why often why a youngest might be, but it's not that. So that is just, wow. Okay. So there's lots of people in this situation of like, I'm never going to know exactly what happened. I'm never going to have that answer. How does that sit with you? Like, how have you dealt with just the not knowing?
It kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes I really, really want to know, and sometimes I'm okay. And I think as time goes on, the okay is more dominant or prevalent than the I really, really want to know. And I think part of that is because, like I said earlier, there is no good reason. There's no good reason. They were married. They were financially stable. They already had 4 children. Like, even if I had an answer, it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be enough. It would never be good enough reason for me on why they gave me away. So I just remind myself, like, yeah, I mean, having a reason would probably satisfy, the unknown, the not knowing, but would it matter in the end? I still would never think it was justified.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think there's so many parts of living the adoptee life that other people just cannot understand. And then within that, there's, all the different little subsets of, okay, so you're the youngest of a fully intact family. And what does that look like? And so I appreciate you talking about some of the very uncomfortable realities that go along with that. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your reunion, navigating that, or any more in that sort of area?
It just is amazing to me not only how we kind of traveled in the same circles a lot of the time, both as children in our families and also as adults. My career path is very similar to my brother's career paths. And I mean, that's just always amazing to me. But also I feel like I knew them. Like I already knew them on some level when I met them. And the picture of my first father that I saw on that first night that looks so familiar to me, I really think that I've seen other pictures of him, that my brothers have showed me at different points of his life, childhood. My aunt, his sister, is so wonderful. She sent me a whole bunch of pictures of him as a child. And actually, I was just out there with one of my brothers, visiting her in California for a week. She's just amazing, so loving, so welcoming. So I've seen pictures of my first father in childhood, college, as a grandfather, older. And this picture, this particular one that I saw, is the only one that he looks so familiar. And it was taken right around that time, around my conception. And so I feel like I saw him. Like I must have seen him in the hospital in that time before I was picked up by the attorney. And I know him. Like I knew his face at a very, very deep level. And I knew my brother's voices. Like I knew them. And that to me is that's just amazing. We know. We know.
We know. I love that. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your story and like going into all those things. Oh my goodness. I wish we had like another hour to keep going. But let's go ahead and do our recommended resources. And I'm going to let you go first because you have kind of like a cool story. So why don't you go ahead and share that?
I guess it must have been about 1.5 years ago. Haley, you invited Katrina Palmer to do a book club on Facebook, like a pop-up book club. So I researched the book and I thought it sounded so fascinating. And so I joined the book club. And one of the first posts in the book club was like something like, introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your adoption, just a short little snippet about your adoptee story. And so I did, and there was like 200 and something comments on that post. And I posted my little snippet, and then just a few down from me, someone else posted. Oh, and it also said, where are you from? Like, where do you live? And so a few people down from me, I caught when they posted, like in real time, that this person also said they lived where I live. And I was like, what? An adoptee that lives here, that's on this, like, that listens to Adoptees On, that is on this pop-up book club page. I could not even believe it. And I was just like, oh man, I gotta contact her. So I messaged her, which is not very much like me, but I messaged her out of the blue, and I was like, hey, I live here too. And I'm an adoptee, and I saw you were in this Haley's book club with Katrina Palmer. And like, do you want to meet up? Would you like to meet? And so she was like, yeah. And so we set a date to meet for lunch, like on a Saturday. And we met, and I was like, I've been thinking about starting an adoptee support group for adult adoptees. And she was like, oh, I've been thinking about that too. Like, I wanted to do that too. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah. And I was like, well, maybe we should do it together. That would be so much better, like, to do it with a friend, even if it's a friend that I just met. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. And so we did it. We met in a library the first time. And then a month later, we met at a coffee shop. And we just kind of put the word out on Facebook, like in various, like neighborhood and community kind of groups on Facebook in our area. And so we had maybe like 2, maybe 3 people that came to the first couple ones. And then Pamela Caranova, she started Adoptees Connect, and we saw that on Facebook. I'm not really sure how we saw that, but like through what we saw that, but it was kind of the same idea. Like, her idea for Adoptees Connect was for adoptee meetup groups. And so we talked with Pamela and we said, can we start a little group here in our area? We already kind of have one going. It's really pretty new, but can we join you? Can we be one of your groups? And of course, she's so gracious and sweet. And she said, yeah, absolutely. And so then we just kind of fell under Adoptees Connect, and it's been 1.5 years that we've been running our adult adoptee meetup. So that was just so serendipitous and so great that we met through your book club pop-up page. And
I did not know that's how you guys met. That's so cool. And I got to meet you both when you came. You live in the DC area, and you came to the conference I spoke at, just to the meetup part. And that was just so fun. And I forced swag on you guys. I was like, take every card and sticker off this table, please.
No, I have it on my giant Hydro Flask water bottle. I have all these Adoptees On stickers.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I love that. Okay. So I don't want to take away from that. I'll double down. The Adoptees Connect thing is so amazing. There's groups kind of starting everywhere. They have, they're growing so quickly that they kind of put a moratorium on starting new groups to make sure all the processes are in place. They're a 501c3, which is a registered charity in the US. And they have a great vetting process for volunteer leaders. Everything is super legit. So I think that by the time this episode goes live, that they will start taking group leader applications again. So if you go over to the Adoptees Connect Facebook page or to their website, you can check that out. And I love how you said how you kind of like joined up with them, that's what I did as well, because it's really neat to have the connection to other people who are in the same leadership position as you are. They're dealing with the same sorts of group issues, right? So you can kind of talk to each other and kind of get support. It's really nice to have your group listed on the website. So there's kind of like one central place that people can come and look. And and there's a lot of help if you're like kind of scared, if you're like, I don't know about running a Connect group. Like that seems like too much, I don't know. I love that. You find a friend that's also adopted, you do it together, and they have manuals and, resources for you to use. And they even have like a mentorship program. So especially if you've never facilitated anything before, you can get matched up with a mentor and they can kind of talk you through some things. So it's really, really well done. So even if you're not sure about starting one in your area, check and see if there is one. Because, even if you message them and say, oh, I'm thinking about starting in this area, but I don't have anybody, maybe they have someone else that's messaged them, you never know. Or you could join a book club and find an adoptee friend. How awesome is that? I'm going to have to send this episode to Katrina because she'll be so pleased to hear that.
Yeah, it was so great. And the Adoptees Connect meetup groups, I get just as much out of it as anybody, maybe even more. There is nothing like talking to another adoptee face to face and walking through tough things together, even if it's just somebody who gets it. Isn't even offering you any kind of succinct advice. You just know that they get it. And I think that there's value in being able to kind of find our adoptee footing and our adoptee voice and identity by kind of mirroring other adoptees and building community with them. I think there's great value in that, especially as we go out into the greater world of non-adoptees and try and tell our stories and, be a voice for adoptees that's kind of counterculture and counter society. Mm-hmm. I just think there's value in those adoptee groups, those meetup kind of support groups, where you can kind of find your grounding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how thankful is your husband and your other friends that you can take your adoptee chit chat to someone who is more interested in.
Oh my gosh. My husband's like, I love you, hon, but I just don't have anything. I don't know what to say to you.
Well, him and my husband can go for beers and be like, oh my gosh, can she talk anymore about being adopted?
I think they should form their own support group, like adoptee partner support group meetup.
Yeah, mine in particular, I'm not going to speak for your husband, but mine in particular, he could use some gold stars for dealing with me. Oh, okay. This was so fun. I loved hearing your story. Fun's not a good word, but I really enjoyed hearing your story, even all the challenging parts. And I'm just really honored that you opened up in such a candid way. And I know it's going to help so many people. If people want to reach out to you, maybe there's some other adoptees who are also a youngest and have kind of struggled with not understanding why. How can they connect with you online?
You can find me at Cathy Caputo on Facebook. And you can also go to my Insta page. It's in the pretty beginning stages, but that is Ghost Girl Found on Instagram.
And how can people find your Adoptees Connect group?
Oh, yeah. So if you go to the Adoptees Connect Facebook page or the Adoptees Connect website, my Adoptees Connect group is Adoptees Connect Northern Virginia. So if you live anywhere in the Northern Virginia area, or even in DC, we have a couple people who come, God bless them, they come all the way from the city to our meetings once a month. You can find us there, Adoptees Connect Northern Virginia.
I will link to all of those things in the show notes, and I'll also link to just Adoptees Connect so you guys can find one in your area. Thank you. Thanks so much, Cathy. I just really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Haley. It was such a great honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
So if for any of you that felt like it was sort of cheating that I just doubled down on Adoptees Connect, I want to give you another bonus resource along with our special announcement. Woo! I love Adoptee Reading, and Karen Pickell has been on the show before. She started Adoptee Reading. It's a website. Adoptee Reading is a comprehensive website with hundreds of adoptee authored books of all kinds of genres. So if you can dream it, you can find it over on adopteereading.com. And if you're looking for your next adoptee read and you've, read all the resources you want and you're ready for something different, I know you can find something over on Adoptee Reading. And the amazing thing I want to point you to today is Karen wrote a list of 100 adoptee authored books for the decade, 2010 to 2019. She has 10 books from every single year of a last decade. Isn't that crazy? Can you believe it's 2020? Anyway, it's such a great list, and it inspired me and one of my Adoptees Off-Script co-hosts to start an Adoptee Reading Challenge for 2020, and we are hosting that over on Patreon. So Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that I use to sustain the show, and I have monthly supporters that donate a certain amount each month to just help pay for the production costs of running the podcast. And there's different levels you can join at. The first level is you get another Adoptees podcast every single week, Adoptees Off Script, and it's hosted by me, and a variety of co-hosts will rotate through, and we talk about all kinds of things, adoptee life, personal things that we wouldn't necessarily share on the show. Sometimes we talk about news stories, sometimes we're talking about a book or a podcast we're loving. We do all kinds of things, lots of different things. So you're never bored if you're listening to Off Script. And we also have an Adoptees Only Facebook group for supporters of the show. So there's different levels. You can go on over to adopteeson.com/partner to see the details for that. But what we're going to be doing with our Patreon this year is we are going to be hosting over there a Adoptee book reading challenge. And this was so much inspired by Karen's list of 100 adoptee authored books from this last decade. There was so many books on there. I'm like, I haven't even heard of some of these books. And, I started to collect adoptee books, and there's quite a few sitting on my shelf I haven't read and I really want to get to. And so a reading challenge we thought would be perfect to help get some of those books read, to get some new books in front of us that we might not have picked up before. Did you know there's fiction written by adoptees that you can pick up? It's not all memoirs. There's so many different genres. Oh my word. It's going to be so fun. So if you want to join us and do the Adoptees On reading challenge, you can go over to adopteeson.com/partner and join us over on Patreon. You can hear about it in our last Adoptees Off Script episode. We talk all about it, me and Carrie Cahill-Mulligan. And we'll also be discussing it over on our Adoptees Only Facebook group. And if that's just not a thing that you are able to do, don't even worry about it. You can pick up whatever book you'd like, an adoptee authored book. Try and pick from a bunch of different genres. Join us and read adoptee work in 2020. And if you're like, I don't really like this self-helpy thing, I don't really want to do that, find some YA, find some poetry. There are so many different things you can read about. And I challenge you to at least read one book written by an adoptee. Our challenge is going to be one adoptee authored book a month for 2020. And so we'll see how we do. Anyway, that's our big announcement. I'm so excited about it. Carrie and I can't wait to host that over on Patreon. So come and join us, adopteeson.com/partner for details of how you can join Patreon. And I'm just looking forward to a really great 2020. So excited to share with you. And next week, we are interviewing, I'm interviewing the author of a beautiful, beautiful graphic memoir. And I can't wait to share that with you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.